The alarm bells rang through the Galaxy Council building, making everyone jump from their seats. Ambassador Taman ran down the long white hallway, his black shoes hitting the metal floor with loud sounds. His heart was beating fast because he had never seen anything like this before. In all his years working with alien species, he burst through the big doors of the main meeting room where hundreds of different creatures sat waiting. The room was huge with a glass ceiling that showed the stars. Outside, some aliens looked like giant insects, others looked like lizards, and some were made of glowing crystals. All of them were making worried noises in their own language. As Timon walked to the center of the room and pressed a button on his wrist device, a big screen came down from the ceiling showing pictures of empty human cities. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every alien I was looking at the screen showing places that should have been full with people but were completely empty. New Sol Prime, the biggest human city in the galaxy, sat empty with lights still on in the windows but no people walking the streets. The moving walkways still moved but carried no one. The hover cars sat parked exactly where their owners had left them, but the owners were gone. Food vendors had fresh food sitting out, but no customers came to buy anything. The alien called Veltar, who looked like a giant praying mantis with 4 arms, stood up slowly. His big green eyes focused on Taman while his mouth parts clicked together, making a sound like breaking sticks. This was how his species showed they were nervous or scared. "I do not understand this, human," Veltar said in his mechanical voice. "How can 40 billion people just disappear like smoke in the wind? We have sensors that can detect a single ship moving between stars, but we found nothing. No ships, leaving no signs of fighting, no distress calls, nothing at all." Taman nodded his head and touched the screen again. Now it showed Haven Prime, another human world. This one was famous for its beautiful gardens and peaceful lakes. The gardens were still perfect with flowers blooming in neat rows, but no gardeners tended them. The lakes reflected the sky, but no families had picnics by their shores. The pictures kept changing, showing world after world all the same story. Empty human cities with everything left exactly as it was. Breakfast dishes still sat on tables with food getting cold. Toys were scattered in playgrounds, but no children played with them. Schools had books open on desks, but no students read them. Ayuna sat in her laboratory 3 floors below the meeting room. She was the only human left on the space station, and maybe the only human left in known space. Her hands shook as she looked at the data on her computer screens. The numbers told a story that made no sense at all. Every human settlement had gone quiet at exactly the same time, even though they were spread across thousands of light years. It was impossible for any known technology to move that many people that fast. She pulled up the communication logs from the last day humans were seen. Everything looked normal until 1542 Galactic Standard Time. Then nothing. She found something strange in the quantum sensor data. There were tiny changes in space itself around every human world just before the disappearance. It was like reality had hiccuped for just 1 second. These changes were so small that only the most sensitive equipment could detect them. Back in the meeting room, panic was growing. The reptilian Empire delegate, a creature covered in red scales and sharp teeth, hissed loudly through his pointed teeth. His yellow eyes glowed with anger as he spoke. "This is clearly an attack," he said, his voice sounding like steam escaping from a pipe. "The humans have been taken by our enemies, or worse, they have abandoned us when we need them most. Either way, we must prepare for war." But the Silicon Brotherhood representative, a tall being made of living crystal that sparkled in the light, disagreed. Her voice sounded like wind chimes when she spoke. "We should not jump to conclusions. The humans were our friends for 300 years. They helped us solve problems that seemed impossible. They would not leave us without good reason." Ambassador Taman knew both aliens were scared. The whole galaxy depended on humans for so many things. Human engineers kept the power running. On most worlds, human diplomats solved fights between different species. Human doctors had cured diseases that killed millions. Human teachers had shown other species how to use advanced technology without humans. The delicate peace that held the galaxy together was already starting to crack. The Hive Collective and the Reptilian Empire had been enemies for thousands of years. Only human peacekeepers kept them from starting another war that could destroy entire star systems. On the abandoned world of Haven Prime, scavenger ships from many different species landed in the empty cities. They came looking for valuable technology and resources left behind. The scavengers were amazed by what they found. Everything was perfect and working, but there were no people anywhere. A group of Aquatic Federation explorers swam through the flooded tunnels under New Atlantis City. Their blue skin glowed in the dark water as they used sonar to map the empty passages. They found residential areas with family pictures still hanging on walls, but the families were gone. They found restaurants with meals half eaten, but no diners to finish them. The strangest thing was that nothing seemed planned. Every sign pointed to humans going about their normal daily lives right up until the moment they vanished. Homework was half finished on student desks. Medical operations were stopped in the middle at hospitals. Construction projects were abandoned with tools still lying where workers had dropped them. Away from the scavenger teams, something else moved through the empty human cities. Security cameras that should have been dead suddenly turned on by themselves. Lights flickered in patterns that spelled out messages in languages no one in the galaxy could read automated systems that had been shut down began working again, as if invisible hands were operating them deep in space, far beyond where any galactic sensor could reach. Massive ships moved through the darkness. These ships were bigger than cities and shaped like nothing any species had ever built. They moved without engines and left no trail in space. Inside them, millions of humans slept in special chambers that kept them alive while their bodies changed in ways that would have seemed impossible before the ships carried humans toward something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting between the galaxies for millions of years. The sleeping humans did not know that their species had been called home by beings who had planted them in the galaxy long ago like seeds in a garden. And the lead ship Jin-Ho, who had once been a simple engineer from New Seoul, stood looking out at the space between galaxies. His eyes now glowed with knowledge that no human had ever possessed. He could see things that existed in dimensions beyond normal space and time. He knew that everything was about to change, not just for humans, but for every living thing in the galaxy. The harvest time had come, but this harvest would be different from all the others because humanity had learned something their creators never expected. They had learned to love others more than themselves, and that love was about to become the most powerful force in the universe. Yuna stared at her computer screen as new data appeared, seemingly from nowhere. The message was short, but it made her blood turn cold. The harvest comes early, it said. Prepare for what humanity has always been meant to become. She did not understand the words, but she knew they meant the galaxy would never be the same again. 3 months had passed since every human in the galaxy had vanished, and the universe was falling apart like a house made of cards. Captain Hyanwoo stood on the bridge of his small ship called the Wanderer, looking out at the burning remains of what used to be a peaceful trading post. The metal wreckage spun slowly in space while emergency lights blinked red in the darknesses. The ship was tiny compared to the massive war fleets that now crossed the galaxy, but it was the last human vessel anyone had seen. The Wanderer had been exploring a distant nebula when humanity disappeared, and now Hyanwoo and his crew of 12 were the only humans left in known space. They watched helplessly as everything their people had built crumbled. Away Lieutenant Sojin walked up beside him, her young face showing the stress of the past 3 months. She had been fresh out of the academy when they started their exploration mission, and now she was one of the last humans alive. Her dark eyes reflected the flames from the destroyed station as she spoke. Captain, we got another distress call from the Coral Gardens colony, she said quietly. The Aquatic Federation says their underwater cities are flooding. The pressure seals that human engineers built are failing, and they don't know how to fix them. Thousands of their people will drown if we don't help the mutant. Wu closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. He felt the weight of an entire galaxy on his shoulders. His small crew had been racing from crisis to crisis for months, trying to save lives and repair systems that only humans knew how to fix. But they were just 12 people against problems that used to require thousands of human experts. Meanwhile, the war between the Hive Collective and the Reptilian Empire was getting worse every day. Without human peacekeepers to stop them, the two ancient enemies had started fighting again. The Hive sent millions of insect soldiers in black ships that looked like giant beetles. The Reptilians responded with weapons that turned entire moons into glass. The Silicon Brotherhood worlds were going dark one by one. Their crystal cities that had sparkled like jewels for centuries were dimming as the power systems failed. These beings made of living crystal needed enormous amounts of energy to survive, but the fusion reactors that human engineers had built were too complex for them to maintain on the Council space station. Dr. Yuna worked alone in her laboratory. The other human scientists were gone, and she was the only one left who understood the quantum detection equipment. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep as she studied the strange data that kept appearing on her screens. The patterns in the quantum field were getting stronger. Everyday reality itself seemed to be bending around certain points in space. She had found dozens of these distortions scattered throughout the galaxy, all of them growing larger and more active. Each one was located near ancient ruins that had been discovered on dead worlds. She pulled up the historical records and gasped. The ruins were millions of years old, far older than any known civilization, but they all shared the same architectural style. Massive black monoliths covered in symbols that no one could translate. The monoliths had been silent and inactive for so long that most species had forgotten they existed. Now they were waking up. The first sign came from a dead world called Kepler 7739. A research team from the Aquatic Federation had been studying the monolith there when it suddenly started glowing with purple light. The researchers tried to run, but something invisible grabbed them and pulled them inside the monolith. The rescue team that arrived later found no trace of the missing scientists. Similar reports came from across the galaxy. Ancient structures were activating on worlds that had been lifeless for millions of years. The monoliths hummed with power that made nearby space twist and bend. Ships that got too close were stretched like rubber before snapping back into normal shape, but their crews aged years and seconds. Captain Hyanwoo received an urgent message while his crew was trying to repair a broken orbital platform above a Silicon Brotherhood world. The message came through on an emergency channel that only the Galaxy Council was supposed to use. Ambassador Taemin appeared on the screen, looking older and more tired than Hyanwoo had ever seen him. Captain, I have terrible news, Taemin said, his voice shaking. We received a transmission from beyond the galactic rim, from somewhere in the void between galaxies. The message was in perfect Korean even though no human sent it. The message said the harvest begins in 30 days, prepare for judgment. Thunwoo felt his blood turn to ice. The void between galaxies was supposed to be empty space with no stars, no planets, and no life. Nothing could survive out there, or so everyone had always believed. But if something was sending messages from that impossible place, then everything they thought they knew about the universe was wrong. Dr. Yuna had been monitoring the transmission when it arrived, and she had traced its origin. The signal came from a point in space that was impossibly far away, so far that it would take millions of years for light to travel from there to the galaxy. Yet the message had arrived instantly, as if distance meant nothing to whoever sent it. She dug deeper into the human archives looking for any mention of harvests or judgment. What she found made her hands shake with fear. Hidden in the deepest files were references to humanity origins that contradicted everything in the history books. According to these secret documents, humans had not evolved. On Earth they had been placed there by something else. The documents spoke of gardeners and harvests of seeds planted across the galaxy and crops that were ready to be collected every few million years. Humanity was not native to the galaxy. They were transplants put there by beings so advanced that they seemed like gods and worlds throughout the galaxy. The ancient monoliths were getting brighter and more active. The space around them began to crack like glass, revealing glimpses of something vast and alien moving in the darkness between dimensions. Ships that ventured too close reported seeing eyes the size of moons watching them from the cracks. In reality, the reptilian empire tried to destroy one of the monoliths with their most powerful weapons. The nuclear missiles simply disappeared when they hit the structure, and the energy weapons were absorbed like water into a sponge. The monolith responded by sending out a pulse that shut down every piece of technology within 100 light years. Panic spread through the galactic civilizations like wildfire. Species that had existed for millions of years suddenly realized they might be facing extinction. The Galaxy Council called emergency sessions, but nobody knew what to do. They were like children hiding under blankets while monsters prowled. Outside their room, Captain Hyun-woo and his crew continued their desperate rescue missions, but they knew they were just delaying the inevitable. Every day brought new disasters, as systems built by human hands failed without human knowledge to maintain them. The galaxy that had seemed so stable and peaceful was revealing itself to be held together by nothing more than human competence and goodwill. In the depths of space, the massive human ships continued their journey toward something that waited in the void between galaxies. The sleeping humans inside were changing, becoming something more than they had been. Their genetic code was rewriting itself, following patterns that had been hidden in their DNA for millions of years. Jinho stood in the command center of the lead ship, watching displays that showed him things no human eyes had ever seen. He could perceive the quantum structure of space itself, and he saw how fragile everything was. The galaxy was like a soap bubble floating on an ocean of chaos, and that ocean was beginning to stir. The beings that had created humanity were stirring in their ancient sleep. They had been waiting patiently for millions of years for their crop to ripen. Now the harvest time had come, and they were awakening to collect what they had planted. But they did not know that their seeds had grown into something unexpected, something that would refuse to be harvested. Dia stared at her final discovery. Buried in the deepest archives, she had found the truth about what humanity really was, and why they had been placed in the galaxy. The revelation was so terrible that she could barely believe it, but the evidence was undeniable, and time was running out to warn everyone about what was coming. The galaxy had 30 days before the harvest began, and nobody knew how to stop what was coming except for 12 humans on a small ship and the millions of sleeping humans traveling toward their destiny in the void between worlds. The 30-day countdown had reached zero, and the galaxy trembled as reality itself began to tear apart. Dr. Yuna watched from her laboratory as space ripped open. Like fabric being cut with a knife through the tears, she could see something massive moving in the darkness between galaxies, something so huge that entire star systems would seem like dust specks compared to which she had spent weeks decoding the final messages hidden in humanity ancient archives. And what she found made her question everything she thought she knew about existence. The documents told a story that spanned millions of years about beings called the architects, who had seeded countless galaxies with life and then returned periodically to harvest what they had grown. Humanity was not the first species they had created. The architects had experimented with thousands of different forms of life across the universe. Each time they would plant seeds, wait for civilizations to develop, and then return to collect the consciousness and knowledge that had grown. They absorbed entire species into their collective mind, using the experiences and memories to become more powerful. But something had gone wrong with their human experiment. The seeds they had planted on Earth had grown beyond their expectations. Humans had developed something the architects had never intended: emotions that ran deeper than logic, bonds with other species that transcended survival instincts. They had learned to sacrifice themselves for strangers and to create beauty for its own sake. Captain Hyun-woo received the final transmission from the human fleet just as the first architect ships began emerging from the tears in space. The message came from Jinho, who had once been a simple engineer, but now spoke with a voice that seemed to contain the wisdom of ages. "Brother, we have reached the source," Jinho said through the crackling communication link. We found the architect homeworld in the void between galaxies, and we learned the truth about what they planned to do to our galaxy. They wanted to harvest every thinking being, every dream, every hope, and add it all to their collection of consumed civilizations. The architect's ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were not built but grown organic structures the size of moons that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Their surfaces crawled with what looked like veins, carrying some kind of energy that made space itself sick around them as they moved through the galaxy. They left trails of distorted reality that turned matter into impossible shapes. On the Council space station, panic had taken hold of every species. The insectoid hive collective delegates were clicking their mandibles so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. The Reptilian Empire representatives had gone completely silent, which was even more terrifying than their usual hissing. The Silicon Brotherhood beings had dimmed so much they were barely visible. Ambassador Taman tried to maintain order, but his voice shook as he spoke to the assembled delegates. We have received reports from 17 different star systems. The architect's ships are not attacking. They are collecting. Every populated world they visit becomes empty within hours, but there are no signs of destruction, no weapons fire, no explosions. The people just disappear. Lieutenant Sojin worked frantically at her station aboard the Wanderer, trying to coordinate rescue efforts across multiple star systems. But for every ship they saved, 10 more vanished. The architect harvest was proceeding exactly as planned, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The alien technologies that had seemed so advanced were useless against beings who could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The ancient monoliths scattered throughout the galaxy were now fully active, serving as beacons for the architect fleet. Each one projected a beam of purple energy into space, and wherever the beams intersected reality, it became unstable. Planets caught in the intersections simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but edited out of reality, as if they had never been there at all. Dr. Yuna made a discovery that changed everything. While analyzing the quantum signatures of the vanishing worlds, the people were not being killed, they were being transported somewhere else. The architect's ships were collecting consciousness and storing it in massive biological computers that existed in dimensions beyond normal space. Each harvest added billions of minds to their collective, creating a hive mind of unimaginable complexity. But the human fleet had reached the architect homeworld ahead of the harvest, and what they found there changed the course of galactic history. The homeworld was a massive structure built around an artificial black hole that served as both a power source and a storage device for all the consciousness they had collected over millions of years. Billions of civilizations existed inside that black hole, their minds preserved forever but trapped in digital slavery. Jinho and the other humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had declared war on gods. The human fleet attacked the architect homeworld using weapons that should not have existed, technology that operated on principles beyond known physics. The sleeping humans had awakened during the journey to find their bodies and minds transformed by their exposure to the void between galaxies. The war that followed took place across multiple dimensions as humans fought beings who had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. The architects had grown complacent after eons of easy harvests, expecting no resistance from their planted species. But humanity had learned something during their time in the galaxy, something their creators had never anticipated. They had learned to fight not just for themselves but for others. Captain Hyunwoo watched in amazement as the quantum sensors showed impossible things happening near the architect homeworld. Space itself was being rewritten as human willpower battled against cosmic indifference. Stars were being born and dying in seconds as the fundamental forces of physics became weapons in a war between creation and consumption. The tide of battle turned when the humans discovered the truth about the architect collective mind. It was not truly unified but held together by the fear and despair of all the civilizations they had consumed. The minds trapped inside the black hole were still aware, still hoping for freedom. Even after millions of years of captivity, Jinho found a way to communicate with these trapped souls, and what he learned gave humanity the key to victory. The absorbed civilizations had been waiting for someone to free them, and they were willing to help destroy their captors from within. The greatest strength of the architects, their vast collective consciousness, became their greatest weakness when that consciousness chose to rebel. The war ended suddenly and completely as the architect collective mind tore itself apart from within. Millions of years of accumulated knowledge and power scattered across the dimensions as the trapped civilizations finally achieved their freedom. The artificial black hole collapsed, taking the architect homeworld with it and leaving only empty space, where gods had once ruled. But the human fleet did not return to the galaxy immediately. Instead, they absorbed the scattered knowledge and power of their defeated enemies, becoming something new, something that had never existed before in the universe. They were still human in their hearts, but they now possessed the ability to reshape reality itself, to protect what they loved. Yuna received a final message as the architect ships throughout the galaxy began to shut down and fall silent. Jinho's voice came through clearly, now filled with power but still recognizably human. "We won," he said simply. "The harvest is over. Architects are gone and the galaxy is free, but we learned something important out here. We learned what we were always meant to become." The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity had become and whether their return would bring salvation. or simply a new form of domination. Only time would tell if the species that had refused to be harvested would choose to become harvesters themselves, or something entirely different, something the universe had never seen before. The space around the Galaxy Council station began to shimmer like water in sunlight, and Ambassador Taman felt his heart skip a beat as massive shapes emerged from tears and reality. The human fleet had returned, but their ships looked nothing like the vessels that had left months ago. These new ships seemed to be made of liquid starlight, flowing and changing shape as they moved through space. Jinho stepped from the lead vessel onto the Council station docking bay, and every alien who saw him took a step backward. The simple engineer from New Seoul was gone, replaced by something that made the air itself hum with power. His eyes glowed with knowledge of forces that could unmake planets, and his presence made reality bend around him like space around a black hole. Assembled delegates from dozens of species whispered among themselves in fear and wonder. Some of the more sensitive aliens, like the Silicon Brotherhood, actually became brighter in his presence, while others, like the Reptilian Empire representatives, hissed and backed away toward the exits. None of them had ever felt power like this, not even from their most advanced technologies. "We have returned," Jinho announced, and his voice carried to every corner of the galaxy, simultaneously speaking in every language at once without any communication equipment. "The harvest is broken, the architects are defeated, and the galaxy is safe. But we did not return unchanged. We have become what we needed to become to protect what we love." Dear Yuna rushed to the docking bay, her scientific instruments detecting energy readings that should have been impossible. Jinho looked at her with eyes that held the memories of fighting beings older than stars and smiled. The same gentle smile she remembered from before humanity disappeared. "You want to know what happened to us?" he said softly. "We learned who we really were." The story Jinho told made the assembled aliens question everything they thought they knew about reality. The architects had indeed been God's beings who had transcended physical existence millions of years ago and spent eternity consuming younger civilizations, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of love and sacrifice. When humanity reached the architect homeworld, they found billions of trapped minds, all the civilizations that had been harvested over millions of years. These souls had been waiting in digital prisons, hoping someone would free them. The humans did not just fight the architects, they liberated every consciousness that had ever been taken, and in doing so gained access to the accumulated knowledge of a million different species. But the transformation went deeper than just gaining knowledge, Jinho explained as he gestured, and the damaged council station began repairing itself, metal flowing like water to seal breaks and restore broken systems. "We absorbed not just information but understanding. We learned how to reshape matter and energy with thought alone, how to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, how to touch the fundamental forces that hold reality together." Captain Hyanwu watched from the Wanderer as his former species demonstrated their new abilities. Human voices spoke simultaneously to every world in the galaxy, offering help and protection to civilizations that had been struggling since humanity first disappeared. The war between the Hive Collective and Reptilian Empire ended instantly as human power froze their war fleets in space and forced them to negotiate. Lieutenant Sojin stared in amazement as human engineers who no longer needed physical bodies worked miracles across the galaxy. Failing life support systems repaired themselves. Underwater cities that had been flooding suddenly became watertight again. Power grids that had been overloading for months stabilized and began producing more energy than ever before. The Silicon Brotherhood worlds that had been going dark for months suddenly blazed with new light as their crystal cities were infused with energy drawn from dimensions beyond normal space. The beings made of living crystal wept tears of liquid light as their cities became more beautiful than they had ever been before. On worlds throughout the galaxy, similar miracles were happening. Pirates found their weapons transformed into tools for building and creating instead of destroying. Poisoned atmospheres were cleaned in hours, allowing dead worlds to bloom with new life. Space stations that had been drifting powerless for months suddenly had more energy than they knew what to do with. But the most incredible change was in the humans themselves. Jinho explained to the fascinated aliens how his species had retained their humanity even while gaining godlike powers. They could exist as pure energy or take physical form as needed. They could be in thousands of places at once or focus all their attention on a single person in need. Had become something new in the universe, beings with the power of gods but the hearts of mortals. Yana asked the question that everyone was thinking. "What happens now? Do you rule us? Do you control us like the architects would have?" Jinho laughed, and the sound was like music that made everyone who heard it feel hope for the first time in months. "We are not your rulers," he said firmly. "We are your guardians, your protectors, your older siblings who learned how to fight the monsters that live in the dark spaces between galaxies. The threats out there are real and they are coming, but you will never face them alone again." The transformation of galactic civilization began immediately, but it was nothing like the brutal harvest. The architects, who had planned human guidance, lifted every species to new heights of achievement and understanding. Technologies that had seemed impossible became commonplace as human knowledge was shared freely with anyone who wanted to learn. The Aquatic Federation learned how to build cities that existed partially underwater and partially in space, allowing their people to explore the galaxy while staying connected to their ocean homes. The Hive Collective discovered new forms of cooperation that made their already impressive teamwork seem primitive by comparison. The Reptilian Empire found ways to channel their aggressive nature into exploration and discovery instead of conquest. Captain Hyan Wu found his role changing as humanity offered him a choice. He could remain as he was, serving as a bridge between the transformed humans and the unchanged aliens, or he could join his species in their new existence. The choice was his to make, and there would be no judgment either way. Lieutenant Sojin chose transformation and watched in wonder as her consciousness expanded beyond the limits of her physical body. She could feel the pulse of every star in the galaxy, sense the thoughts of every living being, and touch the fabric of space itself. But she never lost her essential humanity, her capacity for wonder and love and hope. The Galaxy Council Chamber was transformed into something magnificent, a meeting place that existed in 17 dimensions, simultaneously, where representatives from countless species could gather to discuss problems and share solutions. The old divisions between species began to fade as everyone worked together on projects that spanned entire star systems. But even as the galaxy celebrated its liberation, Jinho stood on the observation deck of humanity's greatest creation, a space station, the size of a solar system that served as a beacon for lost civilizations throughout the cosmic void. His enhanced senses detected something troubling in the deepest reaches of space between galaxies. The architects had been servants, not masters. There was something else out there, something vast and patient and utterly hostile to the existence of conscious life. It had noticed humanity defiance and was now turning its attention toward their small corner of infinity. The real test of humanity, newfound power, was yet to come. Let them come, Jinho said quietly, his voice carrying to every human consciousness across multiple dimensions. We refuse to be harvested, and in doing so we learned who we really are. We are humanity, and we protect our own. The age of human guardianship had begun, and with it, a new chapter in the story of consciousness itself. 1 year had passed since humanity returned to the galaxy, and the universe had become a place of wonders that none of the alien species had ever imagined possible. Captain Hyan Wu stood on the bridge of his transformed ship, the Wanderer, which now existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and could carry entire populations to safety across impossible distances in the blink of an eye. He had chosen to remain mostly unchanged, serving as humanity ambassador to the other species, helping them adapt to their new reality. His ship had become a mobile embassy, traveling from world to world, bringing human guidance to civilizations that were still learning to use technologies that seemed like magic. The grateful smiles of children whose worlds had been saved from destruction made every difficult day worthwhile. Lieutenant Sojin, who had chosen transformation, worked alongside him, but her consciousness now spanned multiple galaxies simultaneously. She could experience the birth of new stars and the final thoughts of dying civilizations while still maintaining a personal connection to individual beings who needed help. Her human heart had not been lost in the transformation, but had instead become the center of a web of compassion that touched millions of lives. The Galaxy Council meetings were now held in a space that existed between dimensions, where representatives from over 1,000 different species gathered to discuss projects that would have seemed impossible just 1 year ago. The old territorial disputes and resource conflicts had become meaningless when human technology could create new worlds from cosmic dust and generate unlimited energy from the quantum foam that filled empty space. Diayuna had become humanity's chief historian and scientist, working in a laboratory that existed in multiple realities at once. Her research expanded the boundaries of what was possible every day, discovering new forms of life in dimensions that standard physics said could not exist. She documented the galaxy transformation for future generations, while simultaneously exploring the deepest mysteries of existence itself. The changes were visible everywhere. The Hive Collective had learned to extend their unity beyond their own species, creating cooperative networks that included dozens of different alien races working together with perfect coordination. The Reptilian Empire had channeled their warrior culture into exploration and protection, becoming the galaxy's premier defense force against threats from outside reality. The Silicon Brotherhood cities now sparkled with light drawn from the quantum vacuum, their crystal beings learning to exist as pure information when needed while maintaining their physical forms for the joy of experiencing texture and sensation. The Aquatic Federation had built cities that floated between the stars, connected by streams of liquid that allowed their people to swim through space itself. But the most remarkable change was in the relationships between species. The old fears and prejudices that had divided the galaxy for millions of years were fading as everyone worked together on projects that required the combined knowledge and abilities of many different kinds of minds. Wars had become impossible when any conflict could be resolved by human mediators who could understand the deepest thoughts and motivations of all parties involved. Jinho supervised the construction of humanity's greatest achievement, a space station the size of a solar system that served as a beacon of hope for lost civilizations throughout the cosmic void. The station existed partially in normal space and partially in the higher dimensions that humanity had learned to navigate. It was a place where refugees from failed galaxies could find shelter and where new forms of life could be nurtured into existence. The station served as the center of a growing network of protected galaxies, each one guided by human guardians who had learned to fight the cosmic forces that threatened conscious life. The network was expanding every day as more civilizations were discovered and brought under humanity's protective umbrella. The age of isolation was ending as the universe became connected by bonds of mutual aid and shared purpose. On the observation deck of the great station, Jinho watched as exploration ships departed for distant galaxies carrying mixed crews of humans and aliens who would establish new outposts of civilization. In the cosmic wilderness, these ships were equipped with technologies that allowed them to survive in environments that would have been instantly lethal. Just 1 year ago, and their crews had been trained to handle situations that defied conventional understanding, but Jinho enhanced senses detected something disturbing in the deepest reaches of intergalactic space. The architects had been merely the servants of something far worse, something that had noticed humanity's defiance and was now slowly turning its attention toward their small corner of infinity. The entity was so vast that galaxies were like cells in its body, and so alien that its thoughts followed patterns that made reality itself sick. The first signs of this new threat were subtle distortions in space-time that appeared at the very edge of the observable universe, where the light of the most distant galaxies began to bend and twist in ways that violated the basic laws of physics. These distortions were growing larger and moving closer, and humanity's enhanced understanding of cosmic forces told them that something unimaginably powerful was stirring in the darkness. Beyond the edge of everything, Darjan analysis of the quantum disturbances revealed that the approaching entity was older than the universe itself, a survivor from the previous cosmic cycle that had somehow endured the death and rebirth of reality. The entity viewed consciousness as a disease that needed to be cured and had spent eternity traveling between universes to eliminate every trace of thinking life it encountered there. Galaxy species looked to humanity for protection as they had learned to do, but even Jinho was not certain that their newfound powers would be enough to face this ultimate threat. The entity approaching them had destroyed countless universes and consumed the life force of beings that made the architects look like children playing with toys. But humanity had advantages that no previous victims had possessed. They had learned to fight not just for themselves but for others, and that shared purpose multiplied their strength. Beyond what any individual could achieve, they had formed alliances with species across multiple galaxies, creating a network of mutual support that spanned impossible distances. Most importantly, they had retained their humanity even while gaining cosmic power. The entity expected to face gods drunk on their own power, but instead it would encounter beings who fought with love and compassion as their strongest weapons. Jinho knew that the coming battle would determine not just the fate of their galaxy but the future of consciousness itself throughout the universe. The preparation began immediately as human engineers worked with alien scientists to create defenses that operated on principles beyond normal physics. Entire star systems were converted into fortress worlds, protected by barriers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Great Beacon Station became the center of a defensive network that could coordinate the actions of billions of defenders across impossible distances. Captain Hyanwu found himself training new crews for ships that would serve as the last line of defense if the main battle was lost. These vessels were designed to carry the essential knowledge and genetic patterns of every species to distant galaxies where they could rebuild civilization if their home was destroyed. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he drew strength from the trust that so many species had placed in humanity. The entity continued its approach, moving through the void between galaxies at a speed that made light seem stationary. It would arrive within a few years, and when it did, the universe would face its greatest test since the beginning of time. But humanity was ready, and they would not face the darkness alone. The galaxy had learned to stand together, and together they would either triumph or fall. As Wanjinho stood at the center of the Great Beacon Station, feeling the thoughts and hopes of quintillions of beings across multiple galaxies, the network of consciousness that humanity had helped create was stronger than any weapon and more resilient than any fortress. Whatever it came from the darkness beyond the stars would find not helpless victims but a universe united in its determination to survive and protect the miracle of thinking life. The age of human guardianship had truly begun, and the greatest chapter in the story of consciousness was about to be written in the space between the galaxies, where gods and monsters fought for the right to determine the future of everything that had ever lived or ever would live.